Today we're doing the book launch for Murders and Pins and Needles by Ardelle Holden. Now, Ardelle grew up in Hudson, in a small town in the northwestern Ontario in the 1950s. In the night, she lulled to sleep by trains and rumbling whistlings along the shores. Planes, boats, and trains, all the mystery adventurers under the covers of a flashlight. Nancy Drew, Trixie Belden, and the Hardy Boys told her so. As she grew up, the real life became that adventure. Ardelle and her husband Patrick raised two children, adventuring together in the aviation, mining, exploration, and the wild rice lakes of northern Manitoba. After moving to Victoria, BC in '85, Ardelle worked as a physician and surgeon. So sorry, worked for. Big difference there. Then back to Bonnet, Manitoba in 2001, she was the country mouse grappler. Now retired in Nanaimo, BC, her plastic flowers and polyester pets enable Ardelle to winter in Ahihik. I practiced that. I hope I got it close, Ardelle.
That's right.
And she slaps paint on canvas, tangles, not tangos, writes novels, and chases rainbows. Murder by Pins and Needles is the last of the trilogy following her debut novel, A Person of Interest, and its sequel, Murder by Bits and Bytes. She says this while she presses her fingers behind her back. Ardelle and I are both members of Crime Writers of Canada, and we actually met at one of the events not put on by Crime Writers of Canada, but by When Words Collide last year, a virtual event that was a lot of fun. And I guess by karma or kismet, I won her book, Murder Bits and Bytes, and that grew into a friendship. So today we're going to be discussing the book itself, but also some of her future projects, and also how she gets her inspiration. Actually, Ardelle, that's a good place to start. This is the third book of your series. We've traveled to different spots. I can see Paris in your book cover. Where do you get your inspiration for your books?
I get my inspiration from, the first book. It was a story that just occurred to me, and I developed the characters one at a time. And as the story developed, they wouldn't shut up. They just kept doing things and saying things, and the story developed from there. I would sometimes think of scenes that would happen in the future, or barriers or obstacles that would happen in the future, and I would make notes of that. But basically, once I had the story idea and the main character, they did the rest of the heavy lifting.
And why is this one in Paris?
This one is in Paris because it begins in Paris. Reason it starts there is because of an incident that happened during World War II to a Canadian soldier. And he brought a child over to he brought a child over to Canada, an orphan, and adopted him. And that's how we get to Paris. It'll come up in the reading.
Excellent. So I guess that leads us to your first reading, where I believe we start in Paris.
That's right. The first reading is just a smidgen from chapter 1 of Murder by Pins and Needles, because I want to introduce you to Adrienne and Lenore Bennett in Paris in 1997. 1997. Tormented by guilt, Adrienne Bennett watched his bride twirling in the Jardin du Trocadero. A band of cooing pigeons fluttered around her feet. Lenore opened her arms and took a deep breath. Ah, Paris in the spring. Her eyes closed as she turned her face up to the warm breeze wafting through the park. She tugged on Adrienne's arm as they strolled past the L'Homme and La Femme sculptures. Aren't these beautiful? Look how they're gazing up at the Eiffel Tower. Was all he could manage. Without slowing his pace, he gave them a cursory glance. One man, one woman, shit. Lenore cocked her head away from him with a quizzical look. I want to remember this moment forever, to describe our honeymoon in Paris to our children. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we've conceived here in the city of love? You're such a romantic, my sweet. That's why I brought you here. He had to deflect the lie. And it's actually the city of lights. Lenore sighed. Whatever, it will always be the city of love to me. She kissed his indulgent smile. This is our last day in Paris. Let's have supper in the Jules Verne restaurant in the Eiffel Tower tonight. If this really is the city of lights, I want to see them in all their splendor before we head home. He agreed with less enthusiasm than he should have. Lenore was trying to hide her disappointment, which caused his conscience to dig its claws into his shoulder. Until 6 months ago, Adrian had been a contented man. Then came that call from Paris.
Now, we did mention this is a trilogy, but there are two people here that we've never met before, Adrian and Lenore. We're expecting to see some other people. Uh, I'm sure we're going to get to Sam and Ben later, but is there a lot you can tell us about these characters?
Lenore,
Without saying too much?
Lenore and Adrian.
Yes.
As you can see, they spent their honeymoon in Paris, and the actual mystery, of course, occurs in the present time. So we're going to get to know them quite well over the next 20 years throughout the book.
Mm.
They're from Nanaimo, and I guess I really can't say too much more about them. You know, they met and they lived and they work in Nanaimo, and she lives with her parents, and at that time in 1997, and when they come back, they do move down to Victoria.
Okay.
So that's about all I can
Good
say
way.
about
Yeah,
this
you can't
point,
say too
because I
much.
give too much away.
It's true because you already hinted at a phone call that brought Adrian to Paris, right? So
Yes, it's the phone call that brought him to Paris on their honeymoon, and that's why he's feeling so guilty.
yes, that's not a good sign, is it, on your honeymoon? I guess I also because I've read some of your previous book. There's a lot of different content. Last time we were dealing a little bit more with like corporate espionage and the police are involved and stuff like that. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book? You're not one of those pantsers, are you?
uh, no, I do plan a little. Just one second here. I seem to have lost. There we go. I lost my my notes,
No.
but I have them now. Here we go. I did make some notes on this because I did do a lot of research. For the first one, A Person of Interest, I researched the Vancouver Police Department, the RCMP, Crime Stoppers, stolen identities, the Charter of Rights, the Criminal Code of Canada, and legal procedure. And for Murder by Bits and Bytes, I researched more of the RCMP and test platforms for operating systems, because it's all about corporate espionage. Various divisions of the RCMP, including Interpol, the US State Police, PTSD, snowfall and temperature on a particular highway on a particular date in the past, and grieving. I did a lot of research on grieving. And for Murder by Pins and Needles, I researched the coroner's office, coroner's reports online, genealogy, wills, trusts, especially a certain kind of trust that you can't get into. and strokes. But then I went and I bent the rules whenever I found that it slowed the pace of the story. And if you're in that profession, you're just going to have to suspend disbelief in order to get on with it. One of my guests is out the window here,
Oh,
and she can't get on Facebook.
so now you have a live audience.
I'm in the middle of the meeting. Oh, it's 3. Oh, she says hers says not till 4 o'clock.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, that's what hers says. Anyway, so she'll probably join us at the end.
All right.
Oh boy.
You mentioned in your research trauma and PTSD. I haven't read it. I know that poor Ben goes through a lot. And I think your second chapter, we're talking about both what he's going through, but also how his wife Samantha is trying to support him. Um,
That's right. Yeah.
is that a major theme in the book?
Well, it's part of his recovery is part of the goal. And by the end of the book, he's much improved. But it's one of those things that can, linger.
Yes.
So yeah, but it is one of the themes throughout the book is his problem with dealing with triggers.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Which I think leads us to chapter 2.
yes, and I want you to pay special attention to the label on this one. Chapter 2, 2018, so now we're in the present. It begins rather slowly. Samantha and Ben have come from the mainland to Vancouver Island by ferry to spend Christmas with Ben's folks, Grace and Lenny Chambers. You'll learn how Ben's sister died and why he suffers from PTSD, but this reading begins after that. It's Christmas morning, and Sam and Ben are skulking upstairs late, having been delayed by, well, you can guess. So, chapter 2, 2018. The heat rose in Sam's cheeks when Lenny gave her a mischievous grin, his lopsided Santa hat perched on one ear. At last, there you are. Get your coffee. The fresh brew beckoned. She tiptoed into the kitchen in bare feet, leading her guilty-looking spouse. Sorry, slept in. Once settled with their steaming mugs, Lenny began his Santa act, ho-hoing over every gift. He seemed especially jolly when he handed a large, ornate gift to her. She gave Grace a quizzical look. What's all this? The lid slipped off to reveal a quilt nestled in white tissue. She gasped. Sam unfolded the quilt as if it swaddled a sleeping baby, revealing a stunning pattern of flying birds outside a window. She ran her hands over the quilting in utter amazement. The lump in her throat kept her speechless. Grace leaned forward. The pattern is called attic windows. Lenny nearly let the cat out of the bag last night at supper. But it looks like it's never been used. I knew you needed one for Ben's office at the cottage. I hope you like it. Like it? I love it. Don't you just love it, Ben? She turned to see her husband's stricken face. He mumbled and tore downstairs. Shocked, Sam watched the pain creep over her mother-in-law's face. Grace took the quilt from her lap. You'd better go to him, dear. She looked from Sam to her husband. What have I done? Scene change, downstairs bedroom. Ben collapsed on the bed. His head was exploding. Images of Jerry's body sinking into the river flooded his brain. He groaned in agony. This can't be happening. He gripped his hair in both fists. He couldn't even acknowledge Sam when she eased the bedroom door open. In an instant, she was at his side and cradling his head against her breast. He could almost hear her heartbeat, the most comforting sound he knew. Ben twisted his body to wrap his arms around her waist and hung on for dear life. Long moments passed until his cries subsided and he could speak. He looked into Sam's gentle green eyes, but no words came. Sam swept the sweaty hair from his forehead. What triggered this? You have to have seen it, Sam. Seen what, Ben? In the quilt, in the window. What? A murder of crows.
We should make a reference. You bring up Jerry, seeing Jerry's body falling into the river. That's a scene from the previous
By
book,
Bits
correct?
and Bytes. Yes, that's right.
And then he's got some, I guess, more traumatic incidents that also occurred to him in the first book, right?
Not so much the first book, in Bits and Bytes. Yeah, that's when his PTSD is triggered.
Oh, okay. I think there was another tragic event for him in the first book, though, isn't
Oh,
there?
yes, in the first book. Yes, when Sandra died. Yeah.
So poor Benny is going through a lot.
Yes, poor Ben. But
uh,
Samantha's there.
uh, that actually seemed like a very hard scene to write. There's a lot of emotion in it. Would you say it was one of the harder things you wrote for this book?
Yes. And I still get choked up. Every time I edited it or rewrote it, or any of the, the death scenes or funerals or murders and endings, I get choked up. Even though I wrote it, I know what's coming. I still find it emotional.
Do you think having that empathy with your characters is essential for being a good writer?
Yes, I think so. You have to be able to get into their heads and into their hearts. And I don't think you can write without some passion. I mean, even if you're writing calculus textbooks, you still have to be passionate about math. It doesn't matter what you write, you need to be passionate about it.
Are there, well, you mentioned a few other of your hobbies. Are there any other of your hobbies that you're as passionate about, or is writing the center?
Well, writing is all consuming at the moment, mainly because the hard work begins after you publish.
Yes.
The writing is the fun part. That's the adventure. That's when your imagination can do whatever it wants, and your characters will dictate that. But once it's carved in stone, basically, and it's out there, then comes the work of promoting and marketing and that sort of thing. So that's the stage that I'm at the moment.
That's true. Yeah, I say that for myself too. The writing is the fun part, right?
That's right. Yes.
But this is a
Yes.
business too, right? So
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
the
And
other thing that you're talking about a lot in this story is what you're behind you, that is the quilts. I don't think I ever asked you, do you make these quilts?
oh, yes. I mean, Grace makes them, but I can't tell you how many there are, but I do have this background that shows you two of them. This is the attic windows quilt, and then this one is called the sewing room. And those three crows that are embroidered in the border that Samantha talked about in this border are also in this border. And the blue hats that are hidden in the in the back of this quilt there's also 6 blue hats hidden in this one, signifying the times when Lenore thinks she's seen it in her 20-year marriage.
So you actually have these quilts.
Yes, I didn't bring them down to Mexico this year, but I did have them. I did have them down here a few years ago when I made them.
And so they're the inspiration of the book? or what came
Well,
first, actually?
actually, a small swatch of fabric gave me the inspiration for this story. I was quilting at Janenko, my club in our hobby workshop in Nanaimo, and I thought of this idea that somebody could put these clues into a quilt. And so then I thought of the blue hat thing, and then I had to find some fabric with blue hats in it, and I managed. And then I had to find a blue hat, and then I had to find a container big enough. And so I found an antique wig box that fits the blue hat. So I can take the blue hat with me to book signings and the quilts to book signings, and people can run their hands over the poetry and see that it really is there.
Oh, actually, just thought of it. I guess that makes you the woman in the blue hat, then, right?
No.
Somebody completely
Yes.
different, right? A work of fiction, correct?
I would love to be a sultry old crow from Paris, but I'm not.
Um, so could you tell us, or do you have a closer look at the quilt? Like all the hidden crows and everything in it? You've told me
Uh,
some lovely stories of how
you can see them a
the
little bit.
secrets
Yeah. And in this one, you can see the blue hat here. Can you see that?
in the bottom corner.
Just below the label where it says, "Remember me, Nikki, love mom, Al Bennett 2015." And then there's a blue hat tucked in underneath that. Do you
Yes.
see that? Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's the size of the blue hats that are hidden everywhere. And you can't see the border in there. You can see the border a little bit here, and there's 3 different crows embroidered all the way around the border of both of these quilts.
So poor crows always get I guess a bad deal from us. Is there a
Sorry?
reason? Poor crows always get a bad, we're like scared of them. We even call them a murder of crows. Is there a reason, or can you even tell us why this triggered Ben? If you can't tell us, don't
Well,
worry.
it's just the word murder,
Mm,
because a group of crows is called a murder of crows. It was the word murder
I see.
that bothered him the most, because when he reacted so violently and went downstairs, he had images of Jerry sinking beneath the waves, and he knew that he'd been murdered in front of his eyes. So that's why just the word murder.
Wow.
It's not so much the crows, it's the word murder that triggers his PTSD in this particular instance. There are other things that do it too, injustices and violence and that sort of thing.
So poor Ben, he's got it pretty bad. And
Yes.
then you said, so how intricate or integral is the better word? How integral are these quilts to your story?
She finds these. She has to find Al Bennett, the person that
In
made
that
these
label.
quilts. This is the provenance. Al Bennett, 2015. That's the provenance, and then the "Remember Me, Nikki, love mom" is for her child. So Samantha doesn't know if Nikki is Nicholas or Nicole. It could be a girl or a boy.
Mhm.
And so finding all of these things, she now has to find Al Bennett, and that's the first step. And she really doesn't have Ben on board at the beginning. Yeah, he's
Yeah, I can
not.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So and she goes through obituaries and all sorts of things, phone books and everything, trying to find this Al Bennett and her children, find out if Nikki is one of 2, one of 5, one of 7, and why did this quilt wind up in a thrift store, almost brand new, unused? It didn't
Oh,
make any
that's a good
sense.
question. Yes.
It doesn't make any sense. And you know, the things that she writes in the poetry are all, the thing is that if she wasn't murdered, and then this is just a pretty quilt. Nobody ever has to put two and two together and figure this out. But because of the circumstances of how she acquired this quilt, she has to know what happened to Elle Bennett and why did this quilt wind up in a thrift store, almost new, never used.
Yeah, and looking at the quilt even from here, it looks quite intricate. So I have to ask then, what takes longer, making a quilt of such intricacy or writing a novel?
Oh, making a quilt like this takes, well, I only quilt on Fridays, so it probably took me 6 weeks, 6 Fridays to do it. And I do farm out the actual machine quilting to somebody else. I took them to my friend Sarah Byers of Sarah and Stitches Quilting Services in Nanaimo, and she has a Facebook page as well. She's a fantastic quilter. She made these look like window panes, and also she quilted around the birds to make it look like clouds. She did a wonderful job. And you can't see the where is it? You can't see the embroidered words on here because it's white on white. And her quilting shows through from the other side, of course. It's on a big 20-foot quilt frame. Yeah, so, but I had the poetry embroidered on the fabric before it went into the quilt, because you're embroidering on one piece of fabric. Whereas, you know, once the sandwich is put together and you've got the top and the bottom and the batting in between, the stuffing, it's thick and you can't embroider on just one side. Whatever you do to it now, the quilting goes all the way through the whole thing. So the embroidery had to be done first.
And I can see from both sides that there's lots of crows. Is a crow's special to you in any way? Is it like your spirit animal?
No, it was just this fabric here made me think of hieroglyphics, like a hidden, mysterious language. It was sort of had a double meaning, that all of these the tiny little crows. Now these ones here, I photoshopped those on. They're not on the quilt, the big ones. And the stripes made me think of prison bars. So it all has a meaning. And the actual pattern on the back is called double cross. And that has a sinister meaning as well.
So 1,000 clues are in these quilts.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot, a lot in it.
I believe your third reading, we're going to talk a little bit about this quilt, or Samantha's discovering some of these clues.
Yes, I'll put this one up. The third reading, let me just get to it here. Oh, shoot. That's not cancel that. Yes. The third reading is in chapter 3. It's called The Quilt. And Grace and Lenny have come from the island to spend Mother's Day weekend with Sam and Ben out at Chambers Lane Cottage in the Fraser Valley. And since the revelation of the murder of crows at Christmas, that's 5 months ago, Samantha had discovered other unusual things about the quilt, including a poem on the back, embroidered in white thread on white fabric. She was giddy to discuss her findings with her mother-in-law. And by the way, you have learned in chapter 2 that Sandra, Ben's sister, who she mentions here, had been murdered a few years ago, and thus part of Grace's motivation to find Elle Bennett, or to help Samantha find Elle Bennett. Chapter 3, the quilt. Saturday morning, Sam couldn't wait for Ben to do something with his dad. She tried to hide a mischievous grin. Why don't you two go kayaking? It's a beautiful day. Lenny soaked up the last of his eggs with a half slice of toast. I think they want to get rid of us, son. She's not very subtle, is she? Ben wrapped his arms around Sam's waist and kissed her. Okay, we're out of here. Be back at noon. Take your phone, hon. The eaglets are huge now. She gave him another quick kiss and shoved him out of the kitchen. Before they even had the kayaks down to the shore, Sam had the quilt spread on the table. Grace smoothed out the wrinkles. Where are your notes, dear? Sam pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Are you okay with this, Grace? Of course. I'm thinking of Sandra when I say we have to find this woman no matter what. We? Grace was nothing if she wasn't resilient. Sam hesitated but laid the poem between them. Let's back away from the details for a minute and think about our first impressions of the top. Yes. When I saw it hanging in the thrift store, I just thought it was a beautiful example of the attic windows pattern. You don't see half of a bird in one pane and the other half way over here in this one. The bird would look way out of proportion. This woman, Elle Bennett, understood that. Sam's eyebrows shot up. Now I know I would not have noticed that. Grace shook her head. If it had occurred to me that I was looking at a murder of crows, I never would have bought it. Well, it's a good thing you didn't think of it then. The more we examine and discuss it, the less anxiety I see in Ben. What do you make of the gray on gray crows repeated in the border? Well, if I had made this, it would mean 3 deaths or 3 witnesses, perhaps? Sam tried to soften the tone of her brutal speculation. Or 3 murders, or 3 suspects? Oh dear, are we really thinking such an awful thing? Sam grimaced. Let's leave the thinking alone for now. They flipped the quilt, smoothing out the ripples. Okay, let's examine this verse by verse. A sultry crow swept across our view, in veiled blue hat or yellow eye. Sam took a sip of her coffee. That suggests to me that Elle Bennett was not alone when she saw the sultry crow in the blue hat. She says, our view. I'm thinking, a husband? And the hat had a veil. I doubt the woman had yellow eyes like a crow, but yellow does symbolize cowardice. I'm thinking crow might have a double meaning here. Grace nodded. Yes, calling someone an old crow is derogatory, but she did call her sultry. So she also thought of her as alluring, perhaps a threat. Maybe she could see that her husband was admiring her. Grace tapped the words, our view. I think the number of crows is significant too. 6 means death is nearby. How many are there? Lots. That many is a murder for sure. Okay, what's next here? Each annum as her murderer grows, a blue hat glimpsed is fleeting by. They stared at the quilt for a few minutes. Grace wagged her finger at it. Annum means year. Her murder grows? A child every year? Sam topped up Grace's coffee. Could be. She paused with the pot hovering above her cup. Maybe it means every time Elle Bennett saw the crow in the blue hat, she had another kid. She snapped her fingers. Maybe 3 kids, like the 3 crows in the border. Grace's eyes lit up. She nodded vigorously with her mouth full of coffee and swallowed too fast, causing a coughing fit. Her eyes watered as she recovered, waving her finger at Sam. I'm okay. Let me see your notes, dear. Sam scooted the paper across the quilt. Grace read with poetic rhythm. Haunting every fledgling's right, the blue hat cause in throaty songs. Sam could hear the resolution in Grace's tone. This is a new level of engagement for her. Sam didn't bring it up, just tapped the quilt. I get this one. A fledgling is a child leaving the nest, right? Grace nodded. Yes, but the blue hat person wouldn't be haunting her own children's rights. It had to be Elle Bennett's children, like Nikki. But how many children did she have? And how many rights per child? Sam looked at the clock. Okay, what are rights? Well, there are religious rights like baptism, could be graduation or marriage. Sam laughed. Right. So there are a lot of rights. Do you think this woman in the blue hat showed up at all Elle Bennett's children's rites of passage and sang no less? Pretty ballsy, if you ask me. My word. If you link it to the lines above, she may have had all her children with her. Wow. Do you suppose they belong to the same church or the kids went to the same school? That would explain why their paths crossed so often. Oh dear, it'd be terrible if she was paranoid about someone from her neighborhood. If that were the case, surely her husband would have dispelled all the fear she put in this quilt. Sam glanced at the clock again. Why don't we go for a walk? It's such a beautiful morning. Grace readily agreed, and they soon were strolling down the lane, enjoying the birds and the smell of spring. Sam's mind wandered back to the quilt, and she slipped the poem out of her pocket. Flight to warmer climes evades not the blue hat crows in palms. Goodness, evades not the blue hat. Could it be the blue hat followed Elle Bennett to warmer climes with palm trees? Maybe on a holiday, or was Elle Bennett trying to escape? Sam scowled. Yeah, and why is this woman singing? Maybe it's a metaphor, like a stool pigeon. Sam snapped her fingers again. What if she sang to Elle Bennett, told her something? I don't think so, dear. I think this woman appeared at these events over the years until the accumulation ceased to be a plausible coincidence in her mind, in Elle Bennett's mind. You're probably right, but there must have been something suspicious enough for her to make this quilt, but not tangible enough to act upon it. Grace, do you think Elle Bennett could still be alive? I don't know. She made this specifically for her son or daughter. Why did I find it in a thrift store? Did she have a falling out with this child? Well, that's a twist. As the King of Siam would say, it is a puzzlement. They wandered back to the cottage, invigorated. Sam glanced out the window. We have to wrap this up. The fellows are back. But there's one more thing we have to think about. What's that, dear? The Roman numeral 1, up here at the beginning of the verse. That must mean there is more than one quilt by Elle Bennett with embroidered poetry on it. Yes, I wonder how many little fledglings this poor woman had. Exactly. Sam quickly folded the quilt and stowed it away, just as the men trudged through the front door, tracking in sand and grass on their wet shoes. Sam smiled at her partner in cahoots and rolled her eyes. That's all you get.
Yep. Although that was a lot. That was a longer reading, but I think it gave me more questions than answers, which is a good thing for the beginning of a mystery book, right?
Exactly.
Now, I think I've asked you this question before, or very similar to it. You and I discussed strong female characters once before with an event we did for Crime Writers of Canada called the Western Wing. I interviewed you, Tara Moss, and Joanna Vanderloop, all from Vancouver Island. Um,
Yes.
so my question is, like, we've already established that the lady in the blue hat is not you, but is there strong aspects of Samantha in you, or maybe a little bit of Grace in you, or is this all fictional?
Yeah, well, I'm Grace's age. But Samantha, the only thing really we have in common is that we both have green eyes and we're left-handed, and that is significant in a person of interest. Um, she works for doctors, and I did too, but not at the level she was at. She was an administrator. I was an MOA for surgeons and GPs. She's more trusting of people, I think, than I am. But she doesn't suffer fools gladly. Whereas I think fools can be fun. But mean or spiteful people, not so much.
Mm.
Samantha is between 20 and 30 years of age during this trilogy. So we're not the same age at all. I'm Grace's age.
What about, were you like her when you were in your 20s and 30s? Because it sounds like you had an adventurous past.
I didn't have her self-confidence. I did a lot of things, but mostly by accident.
Examples you can share?
I definitely did not have, I did not have any adventures like hers. But I did have nightmares of being chased, like in A Person of Interest. I did used to have nightmares, and that was probably from eating too late at night. But I can remember one time I was running from two people, and it was at night, and I ran onto the mule, which is a barge with an engine on it that pulls booms of logs up the lake and down the lake.
Mhm.
And but it's called a mule, so it's got a wheelhouse, and then it's got a large area around it. And I ran out onto the dock, and I jumped onto the mule, and I ran around to the other side of the wheelhouse, and to get away from these people. And they obviously saw me. One came from this side and one came from this side. And I said, and they said, well, we've got you now. And I said, no, you don't. I'm just going to jump in the water. It is so darn cold, I'm going to wake up. And I did.
It's a good thing you did, or you'd be like, uh-oh. I better swim.
Anyway.
So
But
your imagination is a lot of Samantha.
yes, I think so.
You
And
mentioned,
I do watch a lot of mystery movies, and I generally can figure things out. And in real life, there have been situations where we were trying to figure out why something happened or where it happened and that sort of thing. And I'm able to sort that out logically. There have been incidents in my life when I've used my powers of deduction.
would you say you watch a lot of the shows? Do you prefer the American or the European, British? They're so different.
I prefer the British. Yes.
I was guessing you'd say that.
Yeah. And for a couple of reasons. The characters are not perfect. They're flawed. If to look at, as well as mentally, or what their character is flawed in some way. But I'm just thinking in terms of to look at the characters, they're not perfect, and they'll have crooked teeth, or they'll be overweight, or their hair is messy, or they're wearing out of date glasses, or fashion that's out of date, whatever. They're just not perfect. And also their legal system is more like the Canadian legal system. And so I'm less likely to make a mistake
I'm
in procedure.
You said that about British characters, but I never got that feeling about Samantha. She's I wouldn't call her perfect, but I don't know if I'd call her flawed either. Would you?
Um, no, I guess I wouldn't call her flawed, except for her, not physically. No, no, I wouldn't call her flawed. But she has this flaw of trusting when she probably shouldn't. And she's had some bad relationships and some missed opportunities because of this part of her character. But it's not all bad as far as I can see.
Great. Now you did, or we mentioned from the beginning, this is a trilogy, the end of the trilogy. But what have you learned, or what experiences has changed since you've written your first book? How are you changed as an author from book one to three?
Well,
How did you change your process? Maybe
uh,
that's another way of saying it.
well, when I wrote A Person of Interest, I didn't belong to any organizations. I didn't know any authors. I hadn't watched any YouTube videos on how to write. The only thing I had ever, well, I had written in the past, but mostly for business. And I had written stories of my life as I grew up over the years. And, they filled a bunch of dusty notebooks, which we'll get to. Um, um, but the only thing that I did specifically before that was when I was living in Victoria, I did take creative writing at Camosun College. But then after I written Person of Interest and stumbled through the process of self-publishing, then I started joining groups like the Creative Academy for Writers, Crime Writers of Canada, the BC Federation of Writers, and Sisters in Crime, and the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is out of the UK. So I started going to webinars and learning. I had to learn how to create a website, lots of things. But yeah, it wasn't until after I had written and published that I actually found out that there was other people out there that could help me. And so I've learned a lot, and as far as my reviews from the Whistler International Book Awards, the analysis gets better with each book.
That's always a good sign, right?
Yes,
It's
yes.
an art
So
form, right? And the more we do it,
I know I'm learning. I'm getting better.
yeah, I think we could all say that, right? Even 20 books in, 21's going to be better. Oh, well,
Yes,
at least I hope so, right?
exactly. Yeah. Day
Um,
doesn't go by, I don't learn something.
you and I have been talking a lot in the last week, and I have to agree that you've definitely learned a lot because your process of marketing is vast. You told me about book funneling and your distribution list is, I think you're right, pretty much everywhere in the world. It would be too long for me to list them all out. So I think maybe your best bet is to going to your website, right, and to purchase any of your books.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, that's right. I've put all the buy links on my website, and so Amazon, Kobo, Nook, they're all there. Goodreads, everybody.
One interesting thing I saw that you do that probably scare off a lot of independent authors is the audiobooks. I know you've done two, and I'm wondering if you're going to do this as an audiobook too.
Yes, with Murder by Pins and Needles, I am in the process of auditioning narrators with Findaway Voices as we speak. My first book, I hired somebody on a recommendation for my first book. And then I met Crystal Hunt at Creative Academy for Writers, and she referred me to Findaway Voices. And that's where I found Christy Alsip, who narrated Murder by Bits and Bytes. And she did a wonderful job. I needed somebody who could do a Scottish accent. And for this one, I am going to need somebody who can speak with a Parisian French accent. So that's what I'm looking for in a narrator now.
So Parisian French, not just Quebecois French, right?
No, not Quebecois. No.
It's quite different, isn't it? I'm from Quebec, so
Oh,
I
are
know.
you?
Yeah, and I grew up with my parents always telling me it was the language of love. And I was like, Quebec French? I mean, I didn't believe them until I went to France. Like it's a wonderful place. Did you do your research by going to France?
No, no, I've only been over the pond once, and that was for a mining convention in South Africa. So no, I just flew over Paris. But I did do a lot of research online about the gardens and the sculptures and everything about the restaurants and the hotels and things like that for this book.
Yeah, I can see on your background now you've got the three books now. I love how you have the symmetry of the three covers, the light and the dark. Was that
Yeah.
planned from the beginning? Was this always meant to be a trilogy?
No, for a person of interest, that's the third cover for it.
Oh,
And
okay.
the top part is an actual photograph of Vancouver skyline from a high rise in the rain. And that's where the story takes place, in a high rise, on the 10th floor of a high rise in Vancouver. So that's specific. And then on Murder by Bits and Bytes, the background is a vineyard in the Okanagan Valley with blood in the snow. And that's exactly where this story, Murder by Bits and Bytes, takes place. A lot of the story takes place there in that in that vineyard. And then Murder by Pins and Needles, that's the Eiffel Tower, of course. And the bottom half is a crow, and the bottom half of Murder by Bits and Bytes is a sinister character with bits and bytes going past. And then there's a sinister character in the fog at night in Vancouver on a person of interest. So everything about the covers is significant in the story, every single thing.
Wow. Usually the advice people give is not to do their own covers. But you've got an artistic background. Is it your work or somebody else's?
No, Michelle Fairbanks of Fresh Design. She did my covers, all of them. And she did the first two. She did all three for Person of Interest. She came up with the idea of the tear. I think I had a flip page idea sort of thing. And but she's marvelous. I just love it.
Yeah, those are gorgeous covers. So all three
And
books are available through all your distribution channels.
yes, all my distribution channels, Amazon, KDP, and eventually, probably by the fall, I'll have Murder by Pins and Needles available in audiobook. And Find Away Voices distributes to over 40 different audiobook outlets,
Wow.
including Audible. And I do have an Authors Direct storefront on Find Away Voices for my books. So there's a
Good
lot
job.
of different ways that you can buy the books.
To convince me that you weren't going to write a fourth, you showed me are some ideas you had for your fourth book. We don't want to go into it too long, but you're going
No.
to something completely different now, aren't you?
Yes. Uh, I will show you just a snippet. This is my main character in the next series. And it's going to be called the Oliver Frampton Mystery Series. And he's 8 years old, and he has his imaginary friends, Teddy and Alex. And the book was written, the first draft was written in NaNoWriMo last November, National Novel Writing Month. And the goal is 50,000 words in 30 days. And that's how I wrote Murder by Bits and Bytes and Murder by Pins and Needles. So this was my third effort to write the first draft of a novel in 30 days, which I did. And it is written with the idea that it will be rewritten, adapted for a TV pilot. Because in the pilot, Oliver grows up and he solves the mystery at the age of 20. So it's similar to Pins and Needles in that it has two timelines. It's got from the age of 8 to age of 20, and then it's got the present day, but it's the same characters. It's not different characters like Pins and Needles. And he and a sidekick, they solve the murder, the mystery. But at the end of it, there is a hook into the next episode. So,
and I think we're going to deal in a little occult bit, right?
Pardon me?
We're going to deal with a little bit of the occult. There's some mysticism, or
not really. No.
okay.
It is a traumatic mental issue, but it's not ghosts or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So still dealing a little bit with trauma.
Yes. He acquires these imaginary friends at a traumatic point in his life when he's 8 and 9 years old.
You and I have been talking for an hour, and I'm a little worried that perhaps your friends think they're supposed to come on now. You do have your friend Gabrielle says congratulations.
Thank
Ardelle,
you.
good luck with your adventure and storytelling. They sound wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Gabby.
Is Gabby a Mexico friend or a Canadian friend?
No, she is actually from my hometown, that little town in northwestern Ontario, Hudson, where I grew up. She was the postmistress there.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Oh, great, Ardelle. The good news is, if people do have it off by an hour, it's on your Facebook page. So they may not be able to chat live, but they can still watch it, and you'll be able to see it there. And I promise you, I'd send you a copy, so it'll also be on your webpage, most likely, I guess, right?
Yes, I'll put it on my webpage, and I'll also put it on my YouTube channel.
Perfect. You're a very busy person, Ardelle.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this, Eric. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad we met.
Yep, like I said, kismet.
It
was
that's
inevitable.
And so there'll be another time, another year.
Perfect. And I bought a copy of your book, so I'm already enjoying it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Adios.